Hey there friendos, Newbornkilik here, welcoming you back to another awesome Zelda-related video. Now, when you think of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, you probably think of the wonderful music, the great amount of nostalgia that it has brought to all of us, the great amount of joy. Something you probably don't think about is turning. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, turning is a pivotal part of most video games nowadays, and we take it for granted, honestly. So I thought to myself, what if we made turning more difficult? With that, I present to you the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Z-Locked Challenge. The Z-Locked Challenge is going to be a series of videos that we are actually recording over on twitch.tv/Newbornkilik right now, so you can go check that out if you're interested in watching the process unfold. The rules are simple and as follows. We are not allowed to turn Link normally. Anytime that we do any left or right movement on the joystick, for that moment that we are putting that input in, we have to be holding the Z button as well. There are certain things that don't necessarily break our rules, but are generally going to be frowned upon to add a little bit more challenge, such as locking onto enemies. It would be kind of lazy just to, turn using enemies only, and locking onto enemies can create a lot of awkward situations where you accidentally unlock off of the enemy and then you end up rotating Link anyway, so we're just going to try to avoid that as much as possible. With that said, Navi's working overtime in this game, so that is actually more difficult than it seems. So what are our options for this challenge? Well, we can strafe normally as long as the Z button is pressed, and we also have the option to enter or exit a door, and anytime that we do that, we are forcefully rotated to a certain direction. We can also use signs and other forms of interaction with the environment to rotate Link forcefully while not breaking any of our parameters. Through the process of learning with this, we've picked up a lot of really interesting techniques, but I will go ahead and save those for a little bit later once they become relevant in the challenge. So with that in mind, is it possible to beat the Great Deku Tree while Z-locked? And while I won't give away the answer, I will say it's quite an endeavor. However, first things first, we must go ahead and collect the Kokiri Sword and Kokiri Shield as normal. Right off the bat, we're going to drop down this ladder here, ignoring our friend in the process, make our way to the house that has the 4 chests in it, and while we will have to leave and enter a couple times, as Link likes to turn around and show us what he got, looking directly into the camera, which changes our orientation. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes it's not. In this case, it ends up being more of a pain in the butt than anything else, but all of these chests can be obtained with careful manipulation of Link himself. Luckily, leaving this house actually puts us at the perfect orientation to go and grab the Kokiri Sword. We can crawl through this hole very easily. Grabbing the sword automatically rotates us around, so we get a free pass back out the hole as well. Collecting the rupees for the Kokiri Shield is not really a problem. It's a bit more tedious than normal, but honestly not so bad. We can go ahead and talk to Mido, get past him, and head our way into the Great Deku Tree. Surprisingly enough, the Deku Tree is actually one of the more challenging areas in the game, just simply because we don't have any of our tools. And immediately we are met with a very huge problem. We have no way of getting into the door and grabbing the Slingshot. Unless there was some weird quirk about how the game handles camera angles so you could hang off the ledge and essentially choose to face the camera away or toward the ledge depending on when you press the Z button before hanging or after the climbing animation. I mean, that would be asking way too much. So anyway, I started hanging. Honestly, this first episode is going to be a little bit dense with information, but just know that this is the most important tech to the entire run. I'll try to explain it relatively quickly, but just know this is vital. So this form of ledge turning only works when Link is in this one-armed hanging animation, and it seems to have something to do with a very useful technique that we'll explore a little bit later on that I'm going to call orientation preservation. Basically, if you hold Z while doing something that forces Link to change orientation, he will usually return to the original orientation. This is really only useful when hanging from a ledge, as usually these interactions that would force Link to turn one direction or another would also break Z-lock because they have some kind of interaction with them, or you're reading a sign or talking to a person. However, ledges do not break Z-lock, so this ledge turning technique is going to be the main way that we will be navigating around the levels for the rest of the game. Okay, geez, sorry, that's very dense. Honestly, like I said before, this first part's going to be very dense just because there's so many important things for me to explain, and if I don't explain it, it looks like I'm legitimately just cheating and rotating the stick around or whatever. It looks insane, some of the tech that we have for this run. I'll try and make sure that it's not too dense. Any techniques that we use will be explained when they are relevant to the run. Luckily, this ledge turning actually gives us access to the door here, go through the door, take out the Deku, and into the next room. And you're going to want to leave this stone here. You're going to want to go around to the side and use a ladder to climb up. Once we grab the slingshot, it'll actually force our orientation back towards the camera yet again, and at the perfect place to jump back across and exit the door. The only reason you really need to leave the stone intact and not let it fall is so that you don't have to shoot the ladder down. I did it anyway, but you don't really have to do it. I kind of just wanted to get familiar with the controls again. Using ledge turning, we can turn towards a Skullchola wall and climb up. Now you can kill the spiders, but it's not at all required, and it's actually more difficult since we're locked into this awkward Z-locked aiming. We'll cover all the mechanics of the Z-locked aiming in just a little bit, but it's not terribly important right now. Given that the other room up here is completely optional, we'll go ahead and skip that and jump through the web on the ground on the first floor. And we need to take care to leave this chest next to the torch untouched, as it will be critical later on. It might not seem important right now, but this is actually vital to the run. If you undo this chest, it's so much more work. Just trust me, it'll come into play later. This area is actually a great example of how cutscenes can force rotations as well. Usually this is pretty helpful, and in one case, much later on, it's actually vital for a certain temple. If we didn't have this cutscene rotating us, we would not be able to defeat a temple later on. Now we could try to get across this gap here with kind of this awkward angle and a fiery Deku stick, but I decided to just head up to the main room and try this angle yet again, and it really worked out quite well. Burn the web and access the next room. In this room, we are met with another Deku scrub, not unlike the one that we had to defeat to grab the slingshot. However, I make a nearly fatal mistake in this room. During the last parts of the cutscene, the scrub runs off and leaves us with potentially the worst angle we could find for this room, directly away from the door. Now, if I had really been thinking about it, I could have caught him on the other side, which would have given us a much better angle to hit the eye switch above the door. I genuinely thought I had softlocked myself in here, but we found potentially the most obscure way to make this room work. And the tech that I'm talking about, I'm going to coin as plant turning. Plant turning requires you to be in a fairly specific spot around a plant, as far to the left or right while still seeing the grab icon. Go ahead and release the Z button and press A. Will force Link to try and grab the plant. However, since he can't pick up the plant, he is rotated towards the plant and stuck in this kind of grunting animation, which will change Link's orientation. It should be noted that this tech only works for a very short amount of time at the very beginning of the game. Once we get the Goron bracelet, he just kind of picks things up directly and he doesn't actually turn towards them when he picks them up. So this is potentially the only time we're really going to be able to use this tech, and luckily so. With this tech and a bit of patience, we can finally hit the eye switch and move on to the next room. The grinder room? I don't know why this room exists inside of a tree, but maybe I just don't know as much about trees as I thought. First off, I'm just gonna say it, underwater physics are super weird. You are locked into an orientation unless you're diving. Then Link can just rotate freely even if Z is held. Granted, you do need fairly deep water to do this, but it's just really strange how this works out this way. Unfortunately, this isn't terribly useful in this room, but it's important later on nonetheless, just as an option. Getting across the water and defeating the Skullchola, we find a very simple block challenge. Except it's not. This is not a simple block challenge. As it turns out, this slight change in elevation is just enough to stop Link from grabbing the ledge and making this an easy ledge turn. It took us a little while, but eventually we figured out something that I'm going to call advanced ledge turning. This is essentially using the orientation preservation from earlier, but canceling it early to select the angle that we want. That sounds really useful, right? We could do the entire game this way. Yes, but actually no. It is true that we can select any of the angles here in this 180-degree arc, but he only turns 180, and he always goes to his right when he gets up, which limits the uses for this quite a bit. Not to mention, you only have a few frames to get an even decent angle, let alone the oftentimes perfect one that you're going to need for, say, a shot or something like that. Eventually, we're allowed to go on to the next room, which admittedly took quite some time to get through. I'll spare you the long journey, honestly, but basically, I tried to overcomplicate things kind of a lot, and I ended up locking onto an enemy accidentally and rotating, which is a good time to discuss the penalty for rotating. Aside from just failing the challenge right out, I've decided I'll either reset the room, or perhaps, reload a save point or something like that, like a quick save, or just, set the angle back to where it was, assuming it was very clear which direction that I was facing at that time. This is definitely one of the reasons that locking onto enemies is highly frowned upon, aside from just kind of being lazy and not really making us think about the actual challenge overall. We could just enemy turn in basically any room, which is kind of lame in my opinion. Luckily, if we happen to keep our original orientation from entry, we can plant turn fairly easy to the exit. Now, I tried to get cheeky in this room doing a small trick without knowing how to do the trick, mind you, and fell off of this ledge here, meaning that I had to redo the entire basement again. So, F's in chat for that one. Don't be a fool like me, just push the block down, okay? If you recall a little bit earlier, I said we needed to conserve this chest unopened. This is the moment we needed it for. When we open this chest, and assuming we kept our angle from entry, it will turn us 180 degrees and allow us to climb the block again, burn the web, complete the Deku puzzle, and onto Ghoma. I suppose we should briefly go over the aiming mechanics just in case you don't know, as, they do play a pretty important part in this fight. When aiming any sort of ranged weapon, be it the hookshot, slingshot, or bow, with Z pressed, you can only strafe and look up and down. The annoying part is that Link keeps bringing his aim back down to eye level. As a side note, I really hate look spring in video games. I don't know who decided it was a good idea, but it is one of the absolute worst things that could possibly happen in a game. I absolutely detest it. It's like trying to look up in a neck brace, man. It is not fun. So anyway, back to Ghoma, and she's defeated already. Okay. Realistically, Ghoma is basically vanilla. There's not really a whole lot here to talk about. As long as you don't let her spawn any enemies, she's actually very simple, which I can assure you is not a trend for all of the bosses. And with that, we have completed the Great Deku Tree while Z-locked, obtain our shiny new stone and heart container, and we'll be on our way. After a lot of cutscenes. A lot of cutscenes. In all seriousness though, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you think of this series. I'm hoping to do all of the temples. As of right now, we are streaming this over on twitch.tv/Newbornkilik, which I would recommend, coming along and checking it out. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I missed here, anything that I should try. And next time, we will go ahead and take a peek at Dodongo's Cavern and the areas leading up to it. The real question is, do you even think that Dodongo's Cavern is possible under these parameters? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much, my patrons and channel members, for all of your continued support, as well as Twitch supporters as well. You guys have been popping off on chat. I really appreciate it. A very, very special thanks to Grumpy Fox. He's been basically a sponsor of this channel for a while now, and I want to just give him a legitimate thanks, from the heart, bro. I really appreciate it. You're definitely on the, spearhead of trying to make this work for me as far as a, a career path, which you're making wonderful videos for all of you. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Anyway, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I am Newbornkilik, and I will see you in the next one. I'm out.